The Nomiki Show.
Alleen Brown is a reporter with The Intercept, and she focuses on environmental justice issues. She has a story out right now, a pretty groundbreaking story on pipeline protectors, which we all know these water protectors, most likely from the Standing Rock protests that happened a few years ago in 2016. Well, they have been facing off in different locations, on a Minnesota pipeline in particular, with an oil company that has been policing the location, something that's not new, but luckily people are reporting on it more extensively. So, Alleen, first off, how common is this? I mean, we're seeing these stories now and they're horrifying, but how common has it been in the past?
Yeah, so I would say pipeline companies and fossil fuel companies partnering with law enforcement is a pattern that's been around for a while. And it's one that I've been reporting on since Standing Rock was certainly present there. The security team, the security company hired by the company behind the Dakota Access Pipeline, Energy Transfer, was communicating regularly with law enforcement in North Dakota, sharing intelligence information about what was happening. But there's also been kind of creative strategies like this across the U.S. So in Oregon, for example, there was this big liquid natural gas export facility that was planned. It's now on hold. And as part of that project, the company, Pembina, I believe it is, was basically sponsoring an entire new sheriff's office unit. And it was already operating before this project was even built. In Pennsylvania, another energy transfer pipeline, I think it was the Mariner East, either one or two, there were elected constables, being paid to do security for the pipeline. Or they were accused of doing so. I'm not sure exactly where that case stands now. So I think there are plenty of other examples across you. There's also a really routine practice of using off-duty cops to provide security for pipelines and fossil fuel companies. So this public-private partnership around security is quite common, but I think intensifying.
And simultaneously, I mean, I remember with Standing Rock, there were law enforcement officials, or not law, security officials who had been operatives with what was Eric Prince's operation, right? If whatever the latest.
Yeah, so it wasn't Eric Prince's operation, but it was one like it. Okay. So the security company TigerSwan grew out of. It was kind of the company dreamed up by an ex-Delta Forces Special Forces Commander James Reese. So he started this kind of mercenary security company. They were doing security in Afghanistan. And then I guess saw an opportunity with what was happening at Standing Rock to kind of bring some of the strategies they had learned in the U.S. military to the U.S. A lot of strategies that they that evolved during the Iraq and Afghanistan wars were kind of deployed at Standing Rock.
Well, and it's so, I mean, I was at Standing Rock. I don't understand why they would have to have counterinsurgency strategies when there are peaceful water protectors in the water, nonviolent, no weapons. It's mind-boggling to me. Is there any sense, and I know your story is not based on Standing Rock, but is there any sense as to whether or not that was premeditated? I mean, at what point did TigerSwan come in and say, all right, you've got a problem on your hands. We have a strategy, like this is how you're going to stop this camp. I mean, it was just a camp, as you know and many others know.
Yeah, so TigerSwan came in. My understanding is that TigerSwan came in after this like infamous dog attack situation which also involved private security. So this was, a group of water protectors, Indigenous water protectors, went to a space where Enbridge wanted, or not Enbridge, this was Energy Transfer, wanted to start building its pipeline. They were going there to pray. There were believed to be some sacred sites there, and maybe even graves, I'm not sure, but definitely sacred sites. And so they went to the location and found that construction was underway. Security was there with dogs and, kind of sicked them on these water protectors, captured on film, and really kind of injected a lot of energy into the movement and brought a lot of people out to Standing Rock. I think probably the company didn't like this look, and so they brought in TigerSwan in the aftermath of that to kind of oversee these various security companies that were already operating there, and to also, send their own operatives on the ground.
Okay, so let's flash forward to Minnesota. I mean, we've seen more and more folks, Indigenous and otherwise, environmental activists, fight these pipelines and any other sort of expansion of energy services, whether it's as you've described already. So how have things shifted in terms of operations in a place like Minnesota right now?
Yeah, so I think that everyone was very wary of what had happened at Standing Rock. It was clear that law enforcement really wanted to avoid another Standing Rock. I think water protectors also learned from Standing Rock. A lot of the people that are involved with fighting Enbridge Line 3 were also involved at Standing Rock. So everybody's kind of looking at this big movement that just happened next door, and looking for lessons to take with them. So one of the key lessons that law enforcement kind of took forward was that they didn't want to, or I guess the state of Minnesota, was that they didn't want to spend a lot of money on this project or on kind of policing this project. I think North Dakota was ended up with a bill around $38 million. Energy Transfer ended up actually paying a lot of that after the fact, but it was huge expenses for these public agencies, and that was kind of top of the mind of local sheriff's offices in Minnesota. Already this idea of a pipeline company paying for policing as it's happening had kind of been put on the table. In South Dakota, there was a bill, I think it was passed ultimately, that would have created something similar for Keystone XL, where in that case, TransCanada would have paid South Dakota for policing. Minnesota took this idea and it was put into the Public Utilities Commission agreement that was kind of foundational for Enbridge to get permission to operate. This is this account where Enbridge puts in money and local law enforcement and other public agencies are refunded for pipeline-related work. Is kind of foundational to understanding the public-private partnership that's happening. It's an escrow account. It's pretty unlimited from what I understand. And sheriff's offices in particular are submitting invoices. A public official is reviewing them, and then Enbridge is paying them back. There's also money in that account that is going to efforts to combat human trafficking, which is kind of an acknowledgement of this issue, the connection between the fossil fuel industry and issues like missing and murdered Indigenous women. A lot of people working on issues around human trafficking in Minnesota are like, hey, if you bring in, hundreds or thousands of temporary workers from out of state, problems like human trafficking, drug trafficking, they're just kind of naturally going to come with that. So Minnesota acknowledged that as well, and that's part of that account.
It's interesting because you mentioned that these jobs are coming from out of state. When you hear the pitches for a lot of these types of jobs, whether it's fracking or any, oil production or drilling or building a pipeline, it's, especially if it's a public-private partnership, they sell the bill of goods to government as being, it's going to bring you jobs. It's going to bring you jobs. But you're saying that these are out-of-state jobs.
Yeah, there's tons of people that have come in from out of state. I mean, they are also, and I would kind of actually think of, they have also made a big effort to hire Indigenous workers in particular from Minnesota.
Interesting.
And this is actually part of what I would consider, or what I think researchers and experts in corporate counterinsurgency would consider part of that strategy is, really creating quote unquote benefits for the local community, partnering with people that they might have otherwise considered potential project opponents. And, by hiring lots of Native workers, they can say, hey, forget about these 3 tribes that are kind of leading the legal challenges against this project. Look at all these workers we've hired. Look at these Native contractors that we have working. We're doing good work for Indigenous communities.
So let's talk about the ramifications of this pipeline. What are water protectors? I mean, they're water protectors, but what are the ramifications of building this pipeline? And, does it go through Indigenous land, or is it surrounding? Like, how does it affect the lives of these people?
Yeah. So the project, there's a few grounds on which people are concerned. One kind of big picture is the issue of the climate crisis. This pipeline is a tar sands oil pipeline. So it brings tar sands oil from Alberta, Canada, to this transport hub in Wisconsin. The biggest U.S. portion goes through Minnesota. And it's actually, there is an existing Line 3 pipeline, but this project kind of doubles that old corroded line's capacity and actually reroutes it through new territories. And so tar sands oil is one of the most carbon intensive fossil fuels that exists. And in a moment when the climate crisis is just very visible, very rapidly changing our homes and communities in really dangerous ways, a lot of scientists have said we just can't. There's not room for more fossil fuel industry expansion, especially of a fossil fuel like this. Tar sands oil, of all things, is one that we just obviously shouldn't be burning more of and processing more of. So there's the climate issue. There's also the issue of the treaty territory that the pipeline goes through. It travels through a big chunk of Minnesota that isn't necessarily reservation land, but it's treaty land. And so Ojibwe bands in Minnesota have rights to hunt, gather, and I believe travel in this big chunk of land that the pipeline goes through. There are a lot of wild rice lakes. That's a really sacred food for Ojibwe and Anishinaabe people. And some of the tribes are saying that they were not properly consulted about this pipeline traveling through their territory and have concerns about it, damaging the land that is central to their identities and ways of life. So related to that, there's a lot of concern around spills. Pipelines just spill. Enbridge has a particularly terrible record. They're responsible for this, for 2 of the largest oil spills that have occurred in the U.S. One was in the Kalamazoo River in Michigan just really nasty tar sands oil, like sinking to the bottom, really hard to clean up. And I think actually the largest inland oil spill in the U.S. was in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, or somewhere thereabouts. And I believe it was definitely an Enbridge pipeline. It might have even been the Line 3 pipeline. But it was this massive spill that didn't really get a lot of coverage when it occurred, and is high on the minds of the people there. And then kind of the third thing that can happen, which water protectors say is already happening, is the spills that can occur as the pipeline is being constructed. A lot of times, this like drilling mud that's used to put the pipeline under rivers ends up like seeping up and into waterways. It contains a lot of clay and a lot of like sediment that clouds the water and can be harmful to aquatic habitats. And it just happens a lot, like Energy Transfers and Sunoco's. I think it was the Mariner East pipelines in Pennsylvania just had repeated spills like this. And they don't always get as much attention. But there was a report that this had occurred on one of the rivers in Minnesota, actually, over the last couple of weeks.
It just seems to me that at this point, right, when there has been so much attention and many of these spills are happening in states that may not be solely Republican led, like North Dakota was with Standing Rock, what is the local political situation in these states? And I know you mentioned that like there isn't a lot of reporting on this too. I mean, I remember with Standing Rock, there were reporters that were basically being influenced by local lawmakers to not report on Standing Rock or only report on it from their perspective. The local press, it was appalling. I mean, not like it's a surprise that local press is not as strong as it once was, but how do those things work together right now in Minnesota?
Yeah. So, I mean, Minnesota has a Democratic governor. Like a lot of rural areas in blue states, the local politics might be a little different. I'm not sure how the counties that the pipeline passes through voted. But even I think people, the governor has not stood out against this pipeline. I think that there's been a lot of pressure on Governor Walz to make moves, but I think at this point, all the pressure is on the Biden administration rather than the governor, because water protectors have lost hope in him. And even hyper local Democratic politics. In the piece, I interviewed this guy, Bob Markham, who's really active in the Democratic Party in around Aiken County, where the pipeline passes through. It was interesting because this is a guy that at a certain point had spoken out against the project during a Public Utilities Commission hearing, kind of saying that tribes weren't being properly consulted. But Enbridge has planned for this. So they actually put a Line 3 project manager on the board of this Long Lake Conservation Center, kind of a local education center where youth go to do environmental learning. So this guy, this Enbridge pipeline boss, is on this Conservation Center's foundation board. This local kind of Democratic leader joined the board, I think actually after Paul, the Enbridge guy, was already there. And by the time I spoke to him, he really was hesitant to speak out against Enbridge. And I don't really think that this was about the money that Enbridge was providing to the Conservation Center, although there was money via grants and donations, at least like $40,000, which is like a pretty small portion of the Conservation Center's budget. So there was money being passed around. But I think that Enbridge also did a great job of like kind of mastering the art of Minnesota nice. So this guy, Bob, was like, Paul, he takes his kids out to the Boundary Waters, this wilderness area in Minnesota. He really cares about his kids' future. He cares about the environment. Like, Paul is a good guy. He's my friend. And, I think it's more complicated than some people think. So I think, again, this is part of this really holistic approach that the company has taken.
I mean, and that's exactly a perfect example of just how sophisticated and simple also, politics works. It's like, well, he's my friend. I'm not going to, do what's right because now he's my friend. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right.
Okay. So let's talk about the Biden administration. This has been a week where the Biden administration has discussed their environmental agenda. Where does this fit in all that?
Yeah. So, Biden has been really quiet on Enbridge Line 3, except for via kind of like legal filings. We know he intervened to halt the Keystone XL pipeline. That was a huge deal, a big win. He has not intervened his administration has not intervened to stop the Dakota Access Pipeline. And they also have not intervened on Enbridge Line 3. I think like the permitting, my understanding is that maybe it's a little bit more complicated than KXL was in terms of like his administration's intervention, but he definitely could make moves to halt this thing.
And just to remind folks, Keystone XL was halted under Obama. So there's a little cover there in that, This was reversing back to a previous Obama decision, whereas these other two are not.
Right. Exactly. And so, up until this point, we know that he's been in contact with water protectors, or his administration has. So that's certainly a shift from like the Trump administration. But a couple weeks ago, the administration submitted a filing in this lawsuit that a couple tribes, as well as I think a couple environmental organizations, have filed to attempt to halt the pipeline. And basically, his administration argued that this case should be dismissed, that the federal permit should be upheld. He's not doing a press conference about it, but I think that speaks volumes.
Well, it just seems like his environmental policy is all over the place to me. Like it conflicts with each other. Mm-hmm. And then maybe I'm not reading into it as detailed as maybe others are, but how does Deb Holland fit into all this? Has she given the Interior Secretary, of course, she was a water protector herself. She went to Standing Rock. Has she made any statement standing with her Indigenous brothers and sisters in Minnesota, or has there been pressure put on her to pressure Biden?
Yeah, honestly, I'm not sure if she said anything, but there's definitely been invitations for her to come to Minnesota and join the water protectors there. I don't know that she said anything, but I could be wrong. And I believe the permit in question is an Army Corps permit. So I'm not sure where the Interior Department would fit in, but certainly she is a highly influential figure. And perhaps if she was shouting on the rooftops about this, things could shift. I don't know. But yeah, I'm not aware of comments that she's made, although she might have.
Okay. So the big question I have is, do we need this? Do we actually, this is the argument that the Obama administration, we're transitioning, it's too difficult, we're still relying on oil and gas, and we want to be independent from oil and gas, foreign oil and gas in the Mideast. Do we actually need it?
Just no. I'm sure that the tar sands bosses in Alberta, Canada need it. Pipelines make their product cheaper, and you really need cheaper transport to make all this processing for this nasty sludge to work as a fuel. That's expensive. So, pipeline companies oil producers in Alberta specifically, they might need it, but like as humans, like, is this particular like line of fuel essential for us to function? Like, definitely not. Like, no. And if anything, there's like this world is on fire, literally. It's really hot right now. There's these terrible storms. Like, it's just a really bad idea.
Ocean is exploding.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Alleen, this is fascinating work. I would be depressed every single day of the week if I was in your line of work.
Yeah, it's depressing.
I mean, I am depressed for other reasons. But, thank you for continuing my cycle of depression and everybody else's cycle of depression, because we just need to know. We need to have therapy together this way. Your reporting is our therapy. No, but seriously, thank you so much. Everybody go check out our piece. We'll put it up on the screen. We'll put the link down below. Really appreciate you coming on, and let us know if you have any other breaking, horrifying disaster news that we should be covering.
For sure. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Thank you.